to be here with Adam Grant, Wharton professor of the business school and the author of Originals, How Non-Conformists Move the World. And Adam, with that, let's get started. I actually find great and interesting books. Oh, and I did bring a copy of the book in case anyone wants to see what it looks like if they haven't already, as gifts. And I think your book is a gift. What compelled you to write it?
Reid, thank you, but it's the worst gift ever, right? Here's a lot of work to do. It'll take you hours to read. There are a lot of things that compelled me to write it. I had students constantly asking, how do I speak up about my ideas if I'm not the boss? Or how do I get investors to back my startup? I had leaders asking, how do I fight groupthink and get real diversity of thought in my organization? But as a few people in the audience know, one of the real reasons that I wrote this book was when I was a senior in high school, I decided that I would start looking up some people who were going to the same college as me on AOL and see if anyone else had that in their profile. We formed a little group of about 20 people, and it started to balloon. We were emailing back and forth. By April, there were 200 of us. We met up at the pre-freshman weekend. And a lot of those people are my closest friends now. And it was a very early online social network, but sadly we did not have the initiative to turn it into LinkedIn. So I wanted to know, why did I fail to execute on this great idea? And what could others do differently?
And so if you were to give folks one takeaway that you would want them to have taken away from the book, what would that one takeaway be?
I think probably the most important takeaway is that we all have ideas for improving the world around us. Sometimes they're just practices that don't make sense and you think there's a better way to run your meeting. Sometimes it's you actually have a new technology or a new product that you haven't made the leap for. And I think that we all underestimate our ability to bring these ideas into the world. And if you look at the data, 85% of people stay silent when they have an important idea or a bold suggestion. And I would love to see more people speak up.
And then after that, what would be the reason to go and buy the book and devour it entire?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is you said once that you did not become an academic because you didn't want to write books that 50 or 60 people would read. So if even 10% of this audience reads it, we're already over your
Yes, and that would be true. Hopefully maybe they have.
No, I think the thing that really got me inspired from all the things that I learned in the book was how many myths there are about what it takes to be original. I thought that you had to be a first mover. I thought that you had to be an early adopter, that you had to be a risk taker, that you had to be fearless, and none of those things turned out to be true.
Well, there's at least some components of fearlessness, right? Because if you're challenging, like you're being a nonconformist, there is always some risk to that. But part of course, what you address in the very beginning of the book is a question of how to navigate that risk. So what is your suggestion to people in terms of saying, look, if you're going to step out of line, if you're going to challenge somebody, what is the way you manage that risk?
I think the easy way is you manage risk like a stock portfolio. So if you're going to invest in a really risky stock, everyone knows that you're supposed to then take some very boring mutual funds just to make sure you don't lose everything. And there's no reason why we can't manage risk in the rest of our lives that way too. So if you look at the data, if you're going to start a company, then a lot of people think you have to quit your day job. But if you stick around and you decide to start that company as a hobby, you are 33% less likely to fail.
Yeah, although one of the things that was interesting, I was reflecting on this because that part of it was somewhat contrarian, actually, from a Silicon Valley point of view.
But I have data. So.
Yes, I understand. But data never gets in the way of a good argument. And so, part of the thing that was interesting is, I think you're right that part of that it is a central observation that one of the things that most people don't understand about entrepreneurship is actually risk management is actually part of it. It's not like, oh, who cares about risk? Here I go. Is actually that's the Darwinistic of those entrepreneurs who actually usually end up not succeeding in building a plane when they jump off the cliff. But I do think that there's an interesting role for how you balance between risk when you pile all in on a big risk, right? So like one of the things that I frequently say about entrepreneurship is what I just said is you jump off a cliff, assemble an airplane on the way down. There is some point where jumping off that cliff is important. If you actually fail to commit, you'll have a different form of failure. So when I was reading the data on this, I was like, that's interesting. Because your goal is not just not to fail, your goal is to succeed big, and how you do the trade-offs of that. So what's your recommendations about how to balance between those?
Yeah, there's a reason I'm in the ivory tower and you actually live this stuff, right? That's an entrepreneur and an investor. So you're asking the wrong person for recommendations. But I will say, again, going to the evidence on what works for most of the people most of the time, I think there's a point where you have to make the leap. But most entrepreneurs think they have to do it sooner than they really do.
Yep.
And one of the mistakes that I see a lot of entrepreneurs make after they're in my classroom is they say, okay, look, we've got to drop out of school, or we have to quit our day jobs, and we just have to commit right away. And then they feel this tremendous pressure to rush their product to market, as opposed to waiting for the right time, perfecting the prototype, and then saying, okay, this is actually viable. We should go forward with it. How does that track with your experience, both entrepreneur and investor?
Well, the thing that I agree with that in terms of the fact, so roughly speaking, what I tell people to do is say, identify those hypotheses, the way the world needs to be in order for your idea to be true. Then part of the whole thing about failing fast is how do you test those hypotheses as fast and as efficiently as possible? Because you're not actually trying to fail, you're trying to succeed. And the whole point of failing fast is if it's going to fail now so you can pivot, change, iterate on it. And so you're identifying that and driving through it. Now the thing that I was prompting you with, because I actually thought there was great advice in your book, was actually in fact go seek other viewpoints, right? So the prototyping is absolutely right. But part of risk management that good entrepreneurs do is they say, all right, I have this idea, I have this hypothesis, and they don't just go, okay, now what I'm going to go to, well, there's a few people who do this, and some of them very successfully, but most of the successful ones don't go into the back room and then go, voila, it's all done. What they do is they say, okay, I'll start going and talking to people, and I'll say, what do you think of my idea? And it's actually specifically, you shouldn't say that. You should say, what could be improved? How would this idea fail? Because you're it's supposed to get oh, Adam, that's a great idea. Yeah. You should have confidence in it. Because, if you're asking the question of what should I do about this, it's kind of like, I should be giving you confidence. I want confidence. I want to know what might fail and do I have a good list of hypotheses. And that's actually one of the things you have in the first third section of the book is seeking experts, seeking expertise, right? How to think about this. And the way that I think about it is networks, right? So, and obviously this is one of the interesting ties between your earlier book and this one, because there's a whole question of how you do give and take and that act of generosity. So that kind of leads to, I think, it's a good place to kind of, how do you see the connectivity between the two books?
Yeah, wow, there's a lot of ground to cover there. And don't assume that there is any connectivity, right? Because
oh no, I thought.
No, I mean, you sometimes feel a little bit schizophrenic in having these two very different topics, but I think there is some common ground here. So when I think about feedback, I think a lot of people have been given bad advice when they hear the Henry Ford, I don't think he ever actually said this, but the famous quote is, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. And Steve Jobs is famous for a similar mentality, right? I think that leads a lot of people to not ask for feedback at all, which is just terrible.
Yep.
Instead, you don't want to ask people what your innovation should be.
Yes.
Right? What you want to ask, though, is does this version of it work?
Yes.
Would you buy it?
Yep.
And then I think you want to think really carefully about who to go to for that. So I've come to draw this 2x2 after Give and Take was wildly misinterpreted as the book about why nice guys finish first. And I'm like, well, first of all, they finished last too, so let's not forget that part of it. But secondly, being a giver is not about being nice. It's about helping other people.
Yes. And
sometimes tough love is the best way to help them. So the 2x2 is give or taker, right? Are you selfish or are you concerned about others? And then agreeable, disagreeable, which is how pleasant is it to interact with you? And a lot of people think agreeable people are givers and disagreeable people are takers, but there's no correspondence between those axes. Because agreeableness, disagreeableness is your outer veneer, whereas giving and taking are your inner motives. So the people who are the best sources of feedback on new ideas are the disagreeable givers. Right, think about this for a second. A Google programmer described it as having a really bad user interface but a great operating system. And those are the people who are gruff and tough on the surface, but underneath they have your best interest at heart, and they will rip apart your idea to try to make it better. Yep. And then if you convince them, they'll run through walls to support you. Yes. As opposed to these agreeable people who are like, yeah, great idea, and then they never say a word about it because they're afraid to rock the boat.
Yes, no, exactly. And I think that one of the things that's essential, the one thing I would amplify from originals and advice you gave here is you said, look, seek experts, seek expertise. I think that's a good idea. Like that's true. The thing I'd amplify is what most people then go to is, if it's not the person who is the expert on this, don't talk to them. The thing I would amplify in that advice is anyone who's smart, who is perhaps a disagreeable giver, right, who will engage with you in it, it's still worth going through. So, for example, a classic mistake that entrepreneurs make is they go, oh, what's precious is my idea. I'm not going to tell anybody, because then maybe someone else will do something with it.
Yep.
The problem is that's actually, look, there's a lot of ideas. Your idea may be truly unique, right? It happens. It's not common, but it happens. But the thing that actually gives you a competitive edge is you're in motion. You're building it. You're making it happen. That's your actual competitive edge. So if I have 5 minutes with Adam and I go, okay, what's this idea? Like, how do I actually make this play? I should ask you about it, right? Because just that active and intelligent person reasoning actually helps. Sometimes you go, well, that was 5 minutes, didn't really work. Great, I tried. But that's what essentially good entrepreneurs do. So they talk to literally anyone who might help them.
Yeah, so I guess it's like instead of always be closing, always be pitching.
Yes, exactly.
But you know what's fascinating to me about that, you said something that I think is really important, which is when you're going around pitching, I work with entrepreneurs all the time who are afraid that their ideas are going to get stolen. And first of all, there are not that many takers out there in the world. Secondly, they're usually not very good, right? If they're having to steal other people's ideas instead of invent their own, they don't go that far. And third, you have to have a lot of ideas in order to be a successful original person.
Yes.
Right? So if you have the one big idea and you're afraid everyone's going to take it, you're probably not going to do a whole lot because great originals has tons of ideas and they fail more than the rest of us, and that's how they get to good ideas.
And also, I think that was a great point in the originals, which is creativity is not one eureka moment, but actually, in fact, a bunch of ideas that you sort through. You kind of assess, is that one good or not? You talk to experts, you talk to people about it. There's never one idea. Almost every idea is like, okay, this was an initial idea, now how did you refine it? How did you change it? What did you learn? Because as you learn from engagement with customers, as you learn from engagement with other smart experts, with investors, with people, you change the thing. And that's actually the learning curve is what's important. So the generativity of the ideas is not think it's one idea, it's a constant generation of ideas which you're evaluating both internally and with other people. And I thought that was a great part of the originals.
Well, thank you. I want to turn the tables on that because the learning curve over a life cycle, you've defied a lot of the conventional wisdom that you have to be 21 years old to be an entrepreneur. You were in your late 30s when LinkedIn took off, and you had been at PayPal for a while. You've done entrepreneurial work before. But I was really intrigued by these kind of different life cycles of creativity where you have some young geniuses and old masters. What is it that allows you to keep generating new ideas even as you become more experienced in a domain?
So one thing is you have to fundamentally, so always be learning, right? It's kind of a version of the always be closing, right? Always be pitching. And you have to stay intellectually curious in a way that no matter how deeply you think you know something. So like for example, I think I understand consumer internet pretty well. I think I understand consumer internet investing reasonably well. However, I do not think, I think there are important things that I do not know in each of these things. And so part of what, for example, when I'm interacting with anyone, I always go, okay, what do I think this person might know that I don't? And I actually try to steer the conversation in that direction, right? Because I kind of go, I would really like to be learning from what the person's expertise, intelligence, perspective, type of being, what would that add into the things that I can learn? And I think that's what's key. So for example, when I try to recruit people to work with me, one of the key things is actually the learning curve, right? It's are they intellectually curious? So do they ask questions? So like, for example, you sit down with someone and they don't ask you a question. Like I've sat down with people who, and I won't name names on this, who lectured to me for an hour about entrepreneurship, right? And it's like, well, that's nice, right? And I can evaluate how well you know entrepreneurship and so on. But if you're sitting with me for an hour, you should ask me at least a question about it. Right, and that's
just one.
Just
one.
Yes. Right. And so that's the kind of thing where you're like, all right, that gives you a tell. Like the questions that someone's asking you gives you a tell about how intellectually curious they are. So, for example, talking to an entrepreneur. If the entrepreneur just pitches me on their idea and they're like, "So what do you think?" You're like, "Okay, look, that's a valid question as an investor." A potentially great entrepreneur will be going, how do you think I should solve this particular problem? Right? Like, you've worked on this a little bit. Or, what do you think about this in relative to some other ideas that you've seen, or this other thing? Because maybe you're going to say something that will help me and my plan get better. So it's that sort of attitude. And it's, somewhat characterized as staying young in your mind and that sort of thing. Look, I've seen this from you, so I know this is not news to you. Right.
No, it's funny though, because it sounds a lot more like joint problem solving than pitching.
Yes.
And I guess I'm reminded of a trip I took to a foreign country that I won't name either, but which scores very high on the disagreeable end of the spectrum. Where in one day I had 3 people come up to me after I spoke and said different versions of, we should really meet over lunch. You will learn a lot. I've already learned enough, actually.
I've learned enough. I don't need lunch. Yes, exactly. No, one of the things that I thought was actually, in fact, particularly good was like the entrepreneur who pitches why not to invest in the business.
Yeah, Rufus Griscom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I found was it was very parallel to a piece of advice that I give, and it was something in the LinkedIn Series B doc that I published, which is identify your risks. Because part of that collaborative pitching is to say, here are the risks that I see in this business, and here's what I'm doing to solve them.
Yep.
Because what that says is, I'm not pitching you as an object. I'm not just trying to get your money. I'm actually trying to treat you as a partner. I'm actually also intellectually live and learning, because which risk I identified tells me how you're thinking about it. And then also, here's how I think you can be solved. Well, maybe you're going to tell me something that actually helps one of them, improves one of them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all part of that useful, pitching is a collaboration if it's done right.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. So do you want entrepreneurs to come to you and say, here are the 5 reasons you should not invest in my business?
So that would be atypical. And certainly...
Well, not anymore, right?
Yes,
people are going to adopt it after reading the book. No.
Yes, no, exactly. Well, I thought about that, and I would... What I thought is, I thought the substantive point was right when I looked at it, which is, here are the risks, here are the challenges. I don't think you want to say, I want you not to invest in my business, because then it was like, well, are you wasting my time? Why are you talking to me?
Yeah, that's just a marketing gimmick.
Yes, exactly. But what I do think is right is to say, here is what I want you to believe along with me if you want to invest. And if you don't, I've actually seen some great entrepreneurs do this. Look, if you don't believe what I believe about the investment thesis in the business, don't invest, because we're going to be miscoordinated. As much as I want you to invest, and as much as I want your money, we have to be coordinated on what the plan is. So, but that's also code for, look, if you think there's a different investment thesis in why to do this business, then tell me and say what it is. And then let's see if we agree, right? Because part of how I look at financing is it's a late-stage co-founder, and another way of looking at it is it's a marriage, usually on 2 pitches and a dinner, right? And that marriage is
That's not a lot of dates.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So you want to get that as right as possible out of the information that you have, right? And that's why it's collaboration. That's the way you look at these things. The other thing, actually, before we move off risk management, what are the other things that you think that, as part of going through the cycle of, okay, I generate a lot of ideas, I do risk through them. One of them is the network of feedback. What are the other techniques that you think should enable people to take intelligent risk? This is actually one of the things that I think is the key kind of differentiator for when you want to do something interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think the most important thing is to maintain a healthy degree of self-doubt. And it's interesting actually, because in the pitch approach that you were just talking about, you think it's going to make you look like you're not confident to say, hey, by the way, here are all the things that I see as potential threats to my business, and here's why it might not work. But I think it takes a tremendous amount of confidence to do that, right? To say that, first of all, I know that I belong in this room, and secondly, that I can still do something that succeeds even if this particular idea fails. So what I keep finding in my research is there are 2 kinds of doubt. There's self-doubt, and then there's idea doubt. And pure self-doubt, where you're like, wow, I don't know if I can do this, that's paralyzing. It causes people to freeze, and they don't ever act or take initiative. But idea doubt is saying, I'm not sure if this is the right one yet, or I don't know if I pitched this right, or if I've got the right product or the right market. That's energizing. It motivates you to keep improving and iterating. And I guess I would love for people to say, look, if I can just doubt whether this idea is perfect as it is, that's the time when I see whether a risk is crazy or intelligent.
Any suggestions on how to help people cure self-doubt?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is what Carol Dweck outlined in her book Mindset, about shifting from a fixed to a growth mindset. So when you're in a fixed mindset, you're constantly asking, can I do this or not? And I experienced this a ton as a writer. When I started writing Give and Take, I got so excited about the proposal that I ended up accidentally writing a 103,000 word book. And I sent it to my agent, and he said, "This is awful. Like, do not show this to anyone, even yourself." Too late. Yeah. But I went back and reread it, and it was really bad. Like, it was boring even for an academic journal article, and I was just in the mode of how I normally write.
Yes.
And he said, "Write like you teach, not like you do research," which was eye-opening. But I had this whole conversation with him, like, can I do this? Are you sure that I can write a book that anyone would read? And he had a great response. He said, "Of course you can do this. The first few drafts are always crap, and you're just not there yet." And you had to get all that out of your system to then write the good one. And I think to me, that's been the key for managing that doubt.
Because I was asking myself the same question when I asked you about the self-doubt, and I think my answer is very parallel to what you just said.
How so?
The first thing is to gain confidence in yourself as a learner, right? So actually, in fact, say, look, everyone is capable of learning, right? Some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, some people are practice learners. Figure out which combination is you, apply that, and then once you have the confidence in learning, just always be learning. Like every idea I have, I know there's a better version I haven't discovered yet. Great. Keep learning. And then the confidence you can have of being in the room, doing the pitch, saying, do I have the moral authority to do this? Am I scamming people by saying I have this thing? And the kind of self-doubt that I've also seen people have is to say, look, I'm actually genuinely committed to it, and I'm going to learn as I'm doing it. Yeah. Right? And if you have that, then you can say, look, I can allow myself idea doubt. Because part of course, the reason to say, no, this is the perfect idea, this is perfect, is you're actually masking self-doubt as idea doubt. Yeah. Right? You're saying, no, I can't possibly acknowledge that this is not important. And perhaps a good technique for that is to say, look, because like the hypotheses that I mentioned in the investing is, part of how you refine those, you say, well, if this went wrong, what would be the kinds of things go wrong? Like, I'm trying this venture bet. What would be those things? Okay, now how do I measure those? How do I learn about them? How do I think I have a good plan about them? How can I tackle them with some vigor? Right? And that's the kind of thing that I think is, if you have confidence in yourself as a learner, well, look, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Right? And that's the other thing, by the way, human beings. This is another. I actually don't know how to solve this one. Maybe you do. So I'll ask you a question. It was literally something I was thinking about earlier today, not as part of preparing for this, which is we're bad at statistics. So we tend to go, the person who hasn't had a massive success is a failure, and the person who has a massive success is a success. They don't realize, like, look, when you have success, there's luck. There's luck in the timing. Like, for example, you say, well, LinkedIn was really successful. I was lucky to be exposed to Silicon Valley. I didn't make the choice to go to Stanford to say I'm going to learn to be an entrepreneur. If I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been exposed to it, and I wouldn't have seen it. There's a tremendous amount of luck in what goes into these outcomes. It's not 100% luck. There was some strategy, right? Some skill, some assembly of people. Yeah. But it's not 100% either way, and yet people tend to be very digital. Is there anything that you would think that would cause people to realize that, look, I can have confidence in myself, and I realize that even in confidence, I won't succeed 100% of the time?
Yeah, I guess where I start on that one is to say, and you've lived in this world for a long time. I have been struck just in the past few years of stumbling into meeting a lot of the people who have done amazing original things. They're not that different from the rest of us. They're smart, they're motivated, but you meet them and you're like, wow, I know a lot of people who are every bit as smart as them and every bit as hardworking and have not achieved the same things that they have. Yep. And once you see that, it's like, okay, let's stop putting them on a pedestal, and let's stop also lowering ourselves to the point where we think we can't do this too. I mean, you could look at the current political situation and say there are a lot of people who could... But I do think that's a realization that most people don't have the luxury of having, right? Like you came to Stanford, you were here when the internet took off.
Yes.
And you saw a lot of people become wildly successful who are not that good.
Yes.
So how do we expose... Well, some of them died in 1999, but how do we expose more people to that understanding?
Well, this is interesting, because I actually think one of the things, this is an angle for looking at originals, which is part of what you're trying to do is show people how to overcome self-doubt and move it all into idea doubt. Because when you look at it, say, look, generate a number of ideas, do risk management on those ideas, right? Techniques for deploying them when they're essentially non-conformist, when they're going against the grain, against power, against establishment order. And look, you can do it because here's a whole bunch of people who have done it in various different contexts. That's essentially one analytic view of what the move is. Like, for example, and the very first question I asked you was, okay, that's a key idea, why read the book now? And the answer is, well, actually picking up those techniques about how to realize that anyone can be an original.
Yeah, that's a better answer than the one I gave.
Yeah, no, but I just found this way is actually...
You too can learn to be an original. Good luck.
Yes. Yeah. Or, no, here's a pattern. Because actually, this leads to another question I had about, there's an interesting thing about human nature. So one of the things about that Peter Thiel, myself, a few other folks actually have popularized a lot in the last 10 years is say, being contrarian and right is essential to big success.
Yeah.
Right? And obviously being contrarian, relatively easy, right? Being right, a little harder together with that. And one part of this is actually, there's in a competitive edge, part of competition is not just absolute but relative. Right, and actually part of when I was reading this and looking at this, I said, look, this is actually a good set of techniques for to say how to manage risk, how to try to generate ideas, how to navigate those ideas, and actually try to not just go with the flow. How to actually the effort of being an original is actually not just kind of like, oh, it drops from the sky, but it's something you can actually learn to do. But one of the actual key things is it's also to some degree the degree to which it's relative matters, right? Because it's what's the bar for being able to do that. And a different recommendation in the book would be to say, look, the people who do this more and do this better will succeed more, and that's part of the reason for each of you as an individual to do it. How do you think that bar shifts? Like as more people go to nonconformity or more people go to being contrarian, is that ultimately just a good thing? Does the bar just get higher and the skills have to get deeper? How do you think about that? Because the relativeness, the relative nature of human society and competition was the thing I was mulling on this morning.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is buried in chapter 5.
Yes?
Very implicitly. It's interesting. So when Peter came out with 0 to 1, one of the questions that I asked him was, "What's the best answer you've heard to the favorite question of what do you believe that no one agrees with you with?"
Yes.
And he rifled through a bunch of them, and then I thought the right answer was going to be that question is a bad question.
Yes.
And then you're like a meta nonconformist,
Yes.
which is a problem. I mean, I think at some level, right, conformity becomes the new nonconformity. It has in Silicon Valley.
Yes. Well, in theory, although the number of times you get pitched on something that's like, it's the Airbnb of X, it's the Uber of Y, anyway.
Yeah, and I do not ever want to see another new app.
Yes.
Right? Like, if your whole business is an app, please go home.
Yes.
But, no, I know that was harsh. But it's the stereotypical way to be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
No, but I actually think that pitch is important because a lot of ideas are hard to understand at first blush. And this is the reason that I didn't invest in Warby Parker when given the opportunity, which is a very unpleasant experience in retrospect.
Those frequently are in retrospect.
Yes, especially when you only ever consider one investment.
Yes.
I have a 0 batting average. But I remember Neil Blumenthal coming. It was the first class I was teaching at Wharton, and he said, "We're going to sell glasses online." And I was like, "That's crazy. Who would ever order glasses online?" And later they morphed the pitch to say, "We're going to do for glasses what Zappos did for shoes." And then GQ gave them a lift and called them the Netflix of eyewear. And people got it. They were like, "Oh, I wouldn't have ordered shoes online 4 years ago, but now I do that all the time."
Yep.
And I think that's a great way to build a bridge. But I think you're absolutely right that starting there is really dangerous.
Yep.
That this is part of communicating your ideas, not generating them.
Yes.
And I guess to the larger question, I think that every leader needs followers, right? All pioneers are going to have settlers. But what I'm afraid of is people conforming for the sake of conformity, right? Saying like, I actually disagree with you, but I'm going to follow you because I'm afraid of standing out and I want to fit in instead. I'm fine with people, becoming, like sort of late adopters or joining a great movement if they believe in the ideas behind it.
Yep. Well, this is actually one of the things that I had I don't know if it's a disagreement, but it's actually a different angle, and it may or may not be a disagreement, so I'll bring it up. So
That's how an agreeable person would frame disagreeable given. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I just have a different perspective.
no, actually, I'm probably a little bit more disagreeable than that.
I disagree.
Yes, exactly. And now we go into Monty Python. And if you haven't seen the argument sketch, go see it. And so you can get it on YouTube and other places. One of the things, first moving, right? So there, and it is true that frequently the first mover is too early. Like for example, if you're 3 to 5 years too early, you've done something, and if you're that early, you usually just die, and you're the pioneer, all right, versus the settler. And then sometimes, there's other questions where, like first mover in search, Alta Vista, and da-da-da-da. So there's truth to your, actually, in fact, first mover is not all it's made out to be. Now, when I was addressing this point in a class that I was teaching as I'm working on this new thing, Blitzscale, in the fall, it was like, actually, in fact, it's first mover to scale was actually the thing I was saying. Actually, first mover is right, but it's first mover to scale. And so what is it? Not first mover, but it's the scale component and the timeliness. That's something that you think is right, wrong?
So I wish we had had this conversation about 6 months ago, because that would have solved a conundrum, which is first movers have in most industries, except where there are really big network effects or patents, they have a pretty big disadvantage.
Yes.
Because you spend all your time creating the market and getting people used to this idea, and then someone else can swoop in and just make your idea better.
Yes.
You've seen this happen over and over.
Yep.
But I didn't want to say you want to be the last mover. Right? It's too late. But go start a search engine now. Right?
Yes.
That's probably not going to play out that well. Unless there's some fundamentally new technologies.
Yes.
But you're not starting that search engine right now, are you?
Actually, there is a search thing that we're looking at.
All right, so I will ask you no more about that.
Yeah.
But that has to be a very, very different kind of animal.
It has to be.
Right? It can't just be a better version of Ask Jeeves.
Yes, exactly. Yes. We were looking at better version of Alta Vista, retro.
No, so I think that's exactly right. I think first to scale is a really powerful way to look at it. And I think that my point is just that I don't want people to rush to be first.
Yes.
And afraid that if somebody else beats them out of the gate, they're screwed.
Yep.
I mean, I look back and I had so much fun reading through the history of video games. I always thought like Atari was the first mover. No, like Magnavox Odyssey, right?
Yep.
Did you play that?
No, but I remember it.
I had no idea. Like Nintendo sat around, they got rights to distribute that in another country. They learned a bunch of their secrets, and then they made dramatically better games and completely changed the experience of it. And I think that's first to scale.
Yep.
So that completely resonates.
Because when you get to scale, you do get some inherent advantages, if only customer familiarity and brand. Right? Those are actually useful. Those are actually useful attributes.
Yeah.
Brand, for example, is a quasi-monopoly. Right? It's actually one of the monopolies that's allowed because it's like, okay, this is a unique attribute that no one else can take away, and I can use it for awareness, price differentiation, contracts, hiring talent, a whole bunch of other things. So anyway, that was the thing on the first mover that I was like, well, yes, there's an overdrawn cult that causes you to make dumb decisions and just run out.
Yes.
The other thing, by the way, that was implicit in what you were saying that's accurate. It's not the only one. If you have network effect, first mover matters a lot.
Yes.
Right. And so, actually, in fact, first to scale with network effects matters. There's other advantages. Scale, like there's a scale effect.
Yeah.
It's different than network effect. So it's like, okay, Amazon's catalog and all of its distribution centers. That's a scale effect, not a network effect.
Yes.
But it's a very big scale effect.
Yes, and Cosmo missed out on that one.
Yes, exactly.
A long time ago.
If you don't actually get to it, then it doesn't work. So let's move a little bit to kind of the question of what is so you roughly have kind of 3 sections of the book. First one's on risks. Let's move to how it is that you gain allies, right, or collaborators, or connection in your nonconformity, because that was roughly kind of another important section in this book. What would be your key tips for folks in terms of thinking about that?
So I have a few. Before we share them, though, I think there's a better way to reveal them.
Okay.
Which is, you've pitched a lot of ideas
All right.
as an entrepreneur. You've also heard probably more pitches than you want to, right? Great luck at this point.
Mm-hmm. Actually, never hear enough pitches. But
all right, good.
Sometimes you get irritated with a specific pitch, but you're always hopeful for the next one.
That's great to know, because I have a few ideas that
After you ask me this question, I can ask you that one. Yes.
So I'm thinking about writing this book about original. No.
Yes.
But I thought it'd be really great if you would be willing to show us what a good pitch looks like, so we could see you in action. Would you guys want to see that? Yeah. And then maybe we can dissect it a little bit and look at what you do that aligns and doesn't align with what I recommend.
All right. I would be totally happy to do this. By the way, he asked me about this 3 minutes before he got on stage.
At least I asked, right?
Yes, exactly.
Mark Cuban just got blindsided.
Yeah, so I did get a tiny amount of prep. All right, so one of the things that I am doing with a mutual friend of ours, Adam's one, named Byron Geist, is doing this thing called Opportunity at Work. And the problem, so I'll just kind of give the pitch. The problem I'm addressing is we have a serious inclusion problem in the tech industry. We have diversity that needs to be, we have this mammoth growth of tech jobs that are highly valuable and economic, and yet it goes to fairly narrow windows in men and a few narrow windows within race. How do we change that? Right? And what are the kinds of things? And there's things that you do on a company side, like, for example, the Rooney Rule and other kinds of things that say, let's adopt different practices, let's invest in the pipeline. There's a bunch of different work that's important to do. But how do we solve that now? Right? How do we actually, at the end of each year, have made progress against that? And so it's like, well, actually, in fact, what we see is a network of boot camps that are actually being developed and deployed, where those boot camps in 6 weeks can actually substantially increase your skill set in a way that you can get certain kinds of basic jobs within the tech industry and start a career within the tech industry. It could be anything from DB admin, web developer, QA testing, and a set of these things. It's not you become a hardcore Java or C++ engineer, but you actually begin to get technical skills that can qualify you for jobs that actually then move you in the industry, and you can be within them. So these boot camps exist. They've demonstrated that actually, in fact, within a 6-week training, that it's possible to happen. But, by the way, most of the people who go to these boot camps tend to be people who can afford 6 weeks, and call it an average of $11,000, right? Which tends to not play into the inclusion issue that you want to address. So the thought is, let's create a scholarship fund. Right? That scholarship fund will be focused at diversity and inclusion. We will create a reputation system around and a network of these boot camps. They will be incented to work with us because there will essentially be a bunch of money and great students that will come with this. And we will enable the pipeline to good jobs to scale, so that as these boot camps increase either in size themselves or in the numbers of them, the number of people that you employ. So what this requires is operating funds to actually put the network together, to identify the boot camps, to keep the path to jobs, the tech companies, and do that the right way. To make sure that the boot camps are actually, in fact, running a selection algorithm for people who would benefit from the right 6 weeks. And then scholarship funds in order to allow the inclusion to happen, right? And to get that kind of candidate. That's the picture.
I would consider investing in that. Excellent, thank you. A round of applause for Reid. Okay, so the thing that I love most about that is you do something that I rarely see and constantly recommend, which is to state the problem before you outline the opportunity. There's so many people, whatever their idea is, it's not just startups, right? It's I have a suggestion, it's I want to create social change, it's here's my idea. No, you have to say what's wrong with the world first before you can convince people that your idea is going to make it better. And you spent, it seems like a good 3/4 of that pitch just saying, here's the gap, and here's what these boot camps are doing, and here's where they're not succeeding.
Yep.
Is that something you do deliberately?
Yes. Basically, part of the question is, what's the market need you're addressing? The market need may either be identifiable by, like, for example, in this case, with the opportunity works, you can see it. Sometimes it's a green field. It's like people don't realize that they have a need for this, right? But it is actually there. So that market opportunity, because if you're not addressing a market opportunity, nothing there.
And this is also what's outlined so beautifully in your Series B deck from your LinkedIn pitch originally, which is, I think, the most helpful pitching information I've ever seen. So it's good to see that it's alive and well in subsequent pitches more than a decade later.
Yes.
Impromptu, without preparation.
Yes. Well, I was thinking about this recently because I've now done I've actually, we've now, Byron and I are at TED. We're actually just doing the 2-pager that I'm actually going to circulate, because we're like, okay, how do we, because part of, and by the way, this is all based on, like, this is actually part of how I recommend when you do a pitch, LinkedIn Series B pitch, the very first part of it should be, what are the things, the investment thesis is, what are the things that if you believe, I want to be a shareholder in this business, right? It should not be very many. 3 to 7 is a good thing. But if I believe these things, like, ooh, this is really interesting, then the rest of the pitch is essentially saying what that is. So when you're doing a pitch, like this 2 pages, like, here are the facts that are true in the world, here's the market opportunity, and then here is our hypothesis about how we can move strongly against this market opportunity, right? The 2-pager doesn't have the risks. That would be a full pitch, like when I'm sitting down with someone saying, look, maybe, like for example, analyze what the challenges, opportunity, work are. Well, currently all these boot camps are started by these really intense entrepreneurs who think they can scale it to large size. Well, what if actually they can't scale any one of these boot camps to large size? Then you're basing it on, well, then 10x the number of these boot camps will get created. That's a real strong possibility, but it's not a certainty, right? That would be kind of a risk factor that when we're analyzing it, we're looking at, okay, let's be testing, are the boot camps scaling, or do we need the number of boot camps to be scaling? And how do we essentially identify that, and can we address that risk? Right? Anyway, those are the kinds of things that you look at in these kind of pitching.
It's really intriguing. So one thing that also jumps out at me is the pitch is broad enough that I don't actually have to share your goals in order to get excited about it. So one of the things I was surprised to learn when reading through a lot of this research is people with common goals don't always support each other. There's this, Freud called it the narcissism of small differences. Maybe the only good idea Freud ever had. But
there's a couple others, but that one's a good one too.
But the punchline is that in the context of different groups, extreme groups often look down their noses at more mainstream groups. Like, vegans hate vegetarians even more than they dislike meat eaters. This is an empirical finding, not just a joke.
I have no idea, actually.
I love that because, like, they're not serious, right? They're destroying the cause. And so,
and now we got
sorry,
to Monty
vegetarians.
Now we got to Monty Python again, Life O'Brien, Splitter. Anyway,
we could spend the whole conversation on Monty Python.
Yes.
But I think that what's interesting there is the better partners are often people who share your methods, who have similar ways of achieving goals. And so I could see you giving this pitch to lots of people who are interested in mobilizing resources, right? And who think about the deployment of capital in lots of different ways, even if they're not worried about this sort of pipeline problem and all the lack of diversity that we have in the world, which I think keeps the door open much better than saying this is the mission and you have to be on board with this mission.
Yep. The other thing, by the way, part of what I didn't start to do is ABZ planning. So you actually want, and this is actually part of evaluating, if you're being a giver, whether agreeable or disagreeable, right? You essentially want to be able to say, how do I help you refine your plans B, right? And do you have a good plan Z? So part of asking these kind of tough questions. So part of the thing that when you're looking at this, you go, all right, like for example, if you were giving me feedback and saying, okay, this idea that I just pitched in, what would be the top 1 or 2 questions you say? Make sure you're doing this, otherwise you may fail. That's actually a question.
That's a question.
Yes.
Not a hypothetical one.
Yes.
I guess the first thing I would want to know is, how are you going to fund this scholarship, right? Is it possible that this is going to dry up, or that you're going to get stuck putting your own capital into it?
Yep.
So how scalable is that?
Yep. So so the answer to that question, actually, let's do that a little bit. I think this gives a valuable thing of how original should actually, if you're helping people be original, this is actually the precise kind of thing. So you basically say, okay, in terms of capital, the hope is that we might actually be able to get a number of tech companies to provide the basis of the scholarship because they actually want to be part of, with the movement of inclusion versus not. And essentially it's a balance sheet question because you can design the financial model for how these scholarships are actually repaid in the right way, because part of the whole thing is actually, in fact, it's only against a higher income job, and you've architected the whole system against the high income job. So if I don't get the high income job, I don't have to repay the scholarship. If I do get the high income job, then I repay it on very good terms. If you do that as a portfolio the right way, then essentially there's a de minimis hit to essentially the balance sheet. And there may be other ways to cover it such that only the delta, like if it goes, oh, it's only 90 cents on the dollar, we can cover the 10 cents the other ways. And so with that, maybe we can get a bunch of tech companies to actually say, yes, I'm going to support this.
Wow, this is very similar to the model for how VC works.
Yeah, surprise. Yes, exactly. So we're a couple minutes away from going to the audience for questions. So I want to ask 2 more questions myself, and then we'll go to kind of audience Q&A.
And I have one more question for you.
Okay, so we have 3 questions. You want to do your question first?
Yes.
Okay.
I do.
Yes.
Well, now I will.
Yes.
So one thing I'm curious about is, when it comes to finding allies, whether you're trying to, get a coalition of people to, back your idea for improving your workplace, or you're trying to get co-founders or investors or anything like that. You spent your whole life both understanding our networks and changing the way that we operate them. How do you think about activating and engaging your network, knowing that there are lots and lots of people you could go to? You want to talk about your idea as much as possible, but you're not going to spend equal amounts of time with all the people. How do you think about that?
So, great question. It's essentially kind of a triage, and it's a triage of a couple of different variables. So one is one of the ones you addressed in the originals, which is expertise. Another one is just kind of raw kind of creativity. Are they an out-of-the-box thinker? Some people are more of a fountain of ideas than others. And that is a useful thing, because it's oddball, oh, super interesting. That's actually much more interesting than vanilla, slightly interesting, right? You're looking for the really bold challenge, the really bold new idea. And the last one is, how much do they genuinely care about you, right? Because if actually they genuinely care about you, part of the kind of the giver method, the way of thinking about it in terms of giver, they will actually in fact go, I actually care about where your path with this is going to end up. And so, for example, when I started LinkedIn, 2/3 of my network told me, and I thought this was great of them, to say, this is a crazy idea. And when they were really trying to, they said, it's a crazy idea because in a network where all the benefits being in a network, well, the first person no value, second person no value, third person no value, all know each other. This is a valueless network. How is anyone ever going to join this? That's actually really them thinking it through and saying, I don't want you to waste going down this path. And that's caring about you. And you should hear it that way, but you should also ask for it. Because they're worried that, like, oh, I don't want you to think when I'm asking you hard questions about your idea that actually, in fact, I'm being mean or I don't care about you.
No, you're doing it because you care.
Yes, exactly. So it's those variables, and that's roughly when you go, like, and actually what you should actually do when you're beginning to think about, when you let something that's important, you think about, okay, who are the people I must talk to? Like, really think about that. And then when you're talking to people, say, who else do you think I should, like, who's the one person, in addition to you, do you think I should talk to about this? Because sometimes you go, oh, well, maybe. And then you hear from 3 people, you're like, okay, I'm going to go talk to that person. Because it's really important. So those are some of the techniques for triaging. So one of the things, like I said, we talked about the first mover, and you have a lot of experience in the Bay Area. What are the other things that you think is particularly important for a Bay Area audience? Like, we all have our cultural blindnesses, right? What would be the other things that you'd say, we as a Bay Area audience, in thinking about the originals, should say, this is something we should keep in mind to learn, to improve, to be more original ourselves? And kind of like, which myths do you find as a Silicon Valley, both knowledgeable but outsider, that you would tell us?
There are lots of them.
Yep.
Prioritizing. I don't know. Honestly, I think the myth that jumps out at me most at this moment, anyway, is the basic one, that you have to be cut from a different cloth to be an original. That you just need to have this like biological immunity to fear, and that you have to be a total visionary. Steve Jobs said in 1982 that the key to his creativity was that he didn't have the same bag of experiences as everyone else. And I will say that the bag of experiences he chose at the time is illegal in most countries.
You're talking about a literal bag of experiences.
Yes. But I think that so many people, it's so easy to idolize these especially entrepreneurs once they've finished. And I would love to see more people trace their history and say, like, instead of looking for those moments that signaled they were geniuses at age 4, let's look at all the signs that they were actually not that smart. And realize that, like, we all have blips in our trajectories. I think the other thing for a Silicon Valley audience that's probably important is, I guess I watch a lot of people hire on cultural fit.
No. Mm-hmm.
And this drives me crazy. If you look at the data, this is Silicon Valley startups. What you see is that founders who hire on cultural fit, primarily, as opposed to skills or potential, their startups are less likely to fail, and they're more likely to go public. And they benefit from this tremendous solidarity and passion and mission orientation that you had a lot of in the Mafia at PayPal, right?
Not a term that I particularly like, but yes. But I think of it as PayPal Network.
That should have been coined. But I think that if you look at the evidence, then they grow at slower rates than their peer firms. And cultural fit becomes really dangerous because it becomes a proxy for homogeneity. I'm going to hire people who have the same values as me, which means they think the same way that I do, and they're probably going to be a bunch of white men. And you weed out diversity of thought, you get groupthink. What I would love to see more entrepreneurs doing is hiring on cultural contribution. This is a brilliant Diego Rodriguez suggestion at IDEO, where he says, look, instead of trying to clone what's already in your culture, ask what's missing from your culture, and then put a premium on that.
Yep. Actually, I think that's a great point, which is too often ago, we set a culture, we all work this way. You do need to have a strong culture to actually operate and scale effectively. It creates horizontal accountability, it creates shorthand in coordination. All of those things are important for moving fast. That's part of the reason why a culture is actually, in fact, extremely important. However, asking questions like, is this person cultural additive? Right? Is there a way that they will challenge our culture that will cause us to be stronger? Right? Essentially being like anti-fragile, right? In terms of the way that you're defining the culture. I think those things are great adds to how entrepreneurs should think about it. I think it's a gift.
I think there's a phrase there that the cultural additive, I guess the alternative is they're a cultural sedative. Which is not good.
Yes, not that, exactly.
But I do think there's something to be said for, look, you need a strong culture, but what separates a strong culture from a cult is making diversity one of your core values.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, yes, you're kind of doomed to perish.
Yep, totally agree. So speaking of pitches, there's a Commonwealth Club tradition, which is your 60-second idea for most improving the world.
Wow. Definitely not forewarned about that.
All right. And they asked me to spring it on you, so I absolve myself of moral responsibility for surprising you.
That's great. So you were prepared for the blind side.
Yes,
no,
exactly.
I mean, this is so timely given the political chatter that's going on. I want to start a new political party. It's going to be called... Don't applaud. You might not like it.
No, don't applaud yet.
It's going to be called the Confidence Party. And the rule is there are no ideologies, no values. We don't care what you believe in as long as you can lead. Right? You demonstrate that you can make good decisions, that you can vision, that you can handle conflict, and that you're not insane. So there are, in addition to physicals, you have to take a mental, right, and get screened for psychological fitness. Provided that you pass that test, we will vote on conservative, on liberal, on libertarian, whatever lines, for the leader who we think is the most skilled to run this country.
One of the things I think we're having in the political election is there is a strong none of the above movement. Is this your way of phrasing none of the above?
Maybe.
Okay. All right, excellent. Thank you. Now we're going to move to questions from the audience. There is a roving mic. Or one or more of them. And since I can't see that well, I presume that the mic person will find the people raising hands. Okay, and here's the mic person. And there's at least a hand here.
We have our first question from up in the front.
Hi, I'm Zach from Monroe. All these young folks. We go to a new university model designed to change some of the problems in higher education. And so when I joined, I was excited about how new and flashy it was. But that excitement can wane a bit once you realize how much work is actually required. So and you see the same thing in startups and new ventures. You talk about how you can use critiquing your own ideas to get things better, but how do you kind of conserve this energy? This is a question to both of you. In this kind of new hardworking style of bootstrapping startup type thing.
All right, so there's one question on conserving energy. The other question is making sure you have a deep well of it. Part of the thing of actually having people who are good allies, and this is a little bit of the amplifying caring, is when you have, like, it is actually a deeply relevant thing for who you tackle life with, that you give each other energy, right? Because that kind of thing where you go, okay, actually, in fact, at 9 p.m., I have another burst of energy. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to go that extra step. Actually, in fact, really matters, both for you and for the project you're doing. So that's kind of a network answer and the people you're around. In terms of the conservation, it's the flip side of that, which is when you're engaging in things that are draining your energy, make sure it's really critically important, right? And try to figure out how to make sure that, okay, I'm going to do it. And you're always life, projects, startups, Minerva, all, great university, all part of it. But make sure that you're very choiceful of that, and then figure out how to recondition it being less energy as needed.
What he said. I'll add two things. One is to the point about people energizing you. There's some fascinating research by Rob Cross and his colleagues, which literally does a network map of an organization, not on information flow, but energy flow. So you go around and you're asked of all your colleagues, does this person energize you or de-energize you? And then you can create a map, and some people are literally black holes. But other people look like suns in a solar system. And there are some people that just drag everyone down, but most of the time it's relationship specific, right? So there's somebody who energizes me and de-energizes you. And I think it's critically important to pay attention to who are the specific people that energize you, and really understanding who those collaborators are. The other thing that's really important for me is I spend a lot of time, I guess, like administering rewards and punishments based on how well I progress on the stuff that is not energizing. So I literally treat creative project engagement as a reward for finishing the stuff that I don't want to do. It's like in college, one of my roommates, Palmer, used to make me hide his video games when he had to prepare for orgo tests. And he was like, okay, I get to binge on video games for a night after my chemistry exam went well. I try to do the same thing with, okay, there's stuff I need to finish. If I finish it in time, then I've given myself an hour to work on this idea that I'm really excited about.
The other little mod I've had in the last one is, if you have something you really don't like, be willing to accept or think seriously about it or not. Like, okay, what's sufficiency in doing this, right? As opposed to what is extraordinary, right? Because by the way, if you crush yourself, this is like self-doubt, you can't play them. So, another question?
Another question from the back over here.
This is a question for Adam. Can you be originals born, or can you become an original?
Totally hardwired. It's in your DNA. You got it or you don't. Yeah, I think we can all become more original. I think some people have advantages that others don't in terms of being exposed to lots of different kinds of ideas, having parents who focus more on values than rules. There's a lot of evidence about what predisposes people to be comfortable. But one of the things I had a lot of fun writing about is that originality starts with the opposite of déjà vu. There's a name for it. It's called vujade. And vujade is just the simple experience of looking at something that you have seen many times before and seeing it with fresh eyes. The easiest example of this is you're standing in line waiting for a taxi. And you've done this many times in your life. But suddenly you see all these cars passing by, and you're like, they have empty seats. Why can I not have one of those? And then Uber is born. Right? That is a vujade moment, and I think we can all train ourselves to have more of those by looking at the world, and instead of saying, how is it, asking, how could it be, and questioning a lot of the assumptions that other people take for granted. Reid, do you have thoughts on that, on how we can all become more original?
So, just like many talents, some people are running, playing basketball, anything else. Some people are naturally better at it, and some people are less naturally better at it. It helps if you're basketball, if you're 6'4" plus, right? If you're fast on the court, you're coordinated, all those things. But you can learn to be better at it. Creativity, originality, same thing. It's part of the reason why it was a delighted yes to do this with Adam, because actually, in fact, these set of techniques about saying, how do I help myself think more originally? These kinds of things are the way to do it, both in terms of evaluating your ideas and also connecting with other folks and collaborating on it. So actually, just because the parental one is fun, I'll out my dad, who's in the audience. One of the things that he did a lot of when I was in high school was to encourage me to get more Bs, take more time off, and to relax more. Clearly, he was not very successful in that. But it was a central part of the parenting. Anyway.
I think we need a round of applause for your dad.
stage left from Rachel.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the role of creativity in organizations. I just have finished a 2.5-year journey of taking a startup from zero to not zero, and I've really seen the role that creativity and culture plays in making that journey successful. And I'm so interested in how culture is never necessarily seen as one person's job or even everyone's job, but I'm curious, like, how do you help empower people to see culture and the expression of creativity and its role in culture as like a shared objective, a valued objective, something that actually makes it onto your job description?
Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Actually, he never said that, but it's always attributed to him. And it's true, whether he said it or not. I think that the way that I tend to look at this is to say that what you want to understand in your organization is who are the culture carriers. This is a fun conversation to have for those of you who work with other humans.
But few of you.
Yeah, well, soon, maybe. But I think that the conversation starts with who are the people who have most influenced your experience of the culture around here? What you perceive as the values, the norms, the practices, and then what did they do? And then you try to make that more visible. And as you do that, what you start to see is people really value that behavior. And once you know, okay, these are the things that culture carriers do around here, people want to be culture carriers, right? They want to make this place better, either for themselves or other people around them or both. I would love to see more people having that conversation.
I think openness about it. I think part of it's walking the walk, right? So it's kind of the celebrating the people who are doing it, allowing people to take risk, right? So part of actually, for example, good managerial training is how do you encourage risk-taking? Because you go back to the comment I was making earlier where people are like, well, if you succeed, then you win, and if you fail, you lose. Well, then, okay, I'm going to be really cautious about risk. It's like, no, that was, for example, a common thing that I try to teach managers who say, that was a good risk to take. Like, it didn't work, but identify, was that a good risk to take? And if you think it wasn't a good risk to take, it's like, okay, what did we learn? That wasn't a good risk to take, this is what we learned from it. That kind of thing, then applied to creativity and in the creation of culture, I think is very useful.
So you hold people accountable for the process of decision making, not just the result.
Yes, much more for the process. Because frequently it's like, well, that was a good thought. Oh, oops. Right.
Next question is coming from the center.
Hi, I'm Sally Thornton, actually from the Midwest, and I wouldn't have started a company if I stayed there. Back to sort of the social science of living in the Bay Area now, you could become an entrepreneur. But my question is, I love all of what you've written, Reid, and then now what you're doing, Adam. Part of it is this go big or go home challenge of being an entrepreneur. So one of the challenges I see in the diversity side of entrepreneurship is sometimes we don't want to go big. Sometimes we want to be all in our own way. And this is part of what Ariana writes, right, with Thrive, which is how can we be entrepreneurial, be an original, but also think differently about what entrepreneurship looks like. And I'm curious because I think, probably because we're all here, we want to have some originality, but we don't necessarily want to succumb our whole life to it. I'm curious if you see entrepreneurship and originality in new ways that could be materialized with more people addressing it, because I see people saying, no thank you, I still want to have a life, and I want to solve that.
So it all depends on what game you're playing. And there are many valid games, and that is definitely one of them. So look, I want to be entrepreneur, I want to be original, but I don't want to be all-encompassing for a decade plus, where, when it's Saturday at 9 p.m., this is the thing I'm doing. And that's totally reasonable and human. But the question will come is to also then be rational about what kinds of assets you're going to bring around the planet, right? So you come to a VC who say, look, I am responsible for my LPs for creating these game-changing funds and these really, really big things. I can't invest in it, right? Because my whole deal with the university endowments who've invested in me is we are going to put a portfolio where some of these things are just going to go to the moon, and some of them, by the way, are going to go to zero. And so I have to have the ones going to the moon, and I have to be doing that as a shot. And so which network you're going to assemble around you is going to be different. Then you have to think about also, like, what's your competition going to look like, right? And because if your competition is going to say, we're going to raise $50 million, and we're going to give the thing you're building away for free, that's going to make it very difficult for you to do a kind of a moderately paced business. You got to look for a space that's kind of appropriate to that where people go, oh, well, actually, in fact, that kind of thing isn't going to target here because people know that this is an interesting space, but not a huge space. And you have to kind of play to that dynamic. Then you have to make sure that you're going to recruit the talent that will want to be on that journey with you, right? And the reason why here it all tends to go to the unicorns and the really big thing and all tends to beat that way is it assembles a very common pattern in networks. Venture capitalists, talent, people who are trying to figure out, okay, how do I buy a house in this ridiculously priced area? And they all come together with that. And that's the reason. And so you have to deliberately do your strategy against all that, but it's a perfectly noble thing to do.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think part of the reason that I was excited to write about originals of all stripes, right? Like entrepreneurs, creative people, not that entrepreneurs aren't creative, no, but like artists and scientists, and then like social change agents, other kinds of creative people. Is I think we can all be original in small ways, right? Whether it's innovating in a better way to do your job, whether it's trying to improve your community. I will say though that I see a lot of people who kind of fail the Sheryl Sandberg test of what would you do if you weren't afraid, and they would like to be more committed, but they're worried about what other people think. And Julie Hanna, who's here in the audience, taught me something really important about this, which is that it's more important to be respected than liked. And I think so many people hold back because they're worried that other people won't like their ideas. And it doesn't matter as long as other people will look at your idea and say, that was a reasonable risk to take. In the long run, the regrets that we have are inactions, not actions. This is the result of lots of research. And there's a chalkboard in New York City that captured it beautifully recently where they asked people to write their biggest regret in life. Tremendously moving video if you haven't seen it yet. And most of the regrets that people listed were chances not taken. And I would hate for anyone to live their life saying, I wish I had taken this chance. That may not mean becoming a full-blown entrepreneur, right? But I would hate for people to miss that opportunity.
I think, unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, right? So
we have a question from the final row from Cara.
Kari, well, it follows up on that a bit, Adam, because inadvertently I've been around several people who are fast thinkers, happy talking to slow thinkers, and overriding them. And I was wondering, they're all in goodwill. Do either of you have any guidance about what to happen when that keeps coming up in a group and they haven't figured out their rules of engagement, or what guidance you'd give us? Thank you.
It's very close to some of the stuff in the book, so you should.
I think that, I don't know, a lot of this to me is an introvert-extrovert difference, right? Where extroverts are very commonly doing the ready, sort of fire and then, oh yeah, aim thing. Again, data, right? I'm not making this up. Introverts tend to be more deliberative and reflective, right? And words literally come out of their mouths at a slower rate per minute. So I think that it's often hard to get heard, even if you speak loudly, right? Because you're processing more thoroughly. I think there are a lot of ways to navigate this. The simplest one is so you do more brainwriting. So brainstorming research has been going for half a century, and if you look at the results of it, what you see is if you were to take 5 people in the same room and have them brainstorm together, if you would instead put those people in separate rooms to work alone, you would get more ideas and better ideas. And it's like, whoa, what happened to the wisdom of crowds? Well, crowds are not wise at generating ideas because people shut each other down. They're worried about sharing their most wild ideas, and they also want to conform to what's getting popular in the group. What you want to do is this brainwriting technique, which is basically about saying we're all going to generate ideas independently, and then we're going to gather all the ideas that have been created, and then we'll leverage the group's strength, which is about idea selection and evaluation, figuring out which ideas should be better. And that gives everyone a voice, right? There's no the loudest talker gets heard the most problem in that case.
There's another part of that that's particularly useful, because I thought a little bit about the introvert-extrovert thing as well, which is you want to make sure that you have a process of inclusion, and there's multiple ways you could do this, but a process of inclusion to make sure that you're actually selecting the voices that are not just the ones who are going, I'm going to speak now, right? Because those voices, the ones who speak aggressively can be useful. Some of it can be, okay, we go around the room, everyone must speak. Some of us might be that if you're the person who's in charge of the meeting and you're thinking about it, you go, okay, I always ask myself this question in any meeting that's larger than about 5 people is, okay, has someone who is critical not spoken on this topic, right? And I make sure, I don't allow the meeting to end without, okay, I want something from you. Now, in order not to ambush them, I'll say, although I ambush Adam sometimes, I will say, hey, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to know what you're going to say on this. And then give them a little bit of time to go, okay, I'll prepare, as opposed to, oh my God, I'm on the spot. And so that kind of thing, and that's the way you get a group inclusion. So there's multiple ways of having a coordination process, whether it's a meeting, a conversation, a work project, that you actually can get that kind of inclusion. And then you want to do it the right way.
You just triggered one quick thing, which is after the NASA Space Shuttle Columbia exploded, they were spending a lot of time trying to figure out, there were people who knew that this was a serious safety risk to re-enter and didn't speak up. And one of the questions they added to every meeting was, does anyone have any critical information that they have not shared yet? And that's your chance to come in, right? I never want to see a group have a meeting without posing that question before it ends.
Yes, exactly. So with that, let's thank Adam for being here with us.
I'm going to ambush back just for a second and say that I want to say a couple things. One is that LinkedIn has really been life-changing for me. I spent years trying to keep track of my network in an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes, we're a small step up from that.
Just a bit. But you've not only given so many opportunities to share ideas on the platform, but also the chance to know where everyone is, to help people find jobs where you didn't even know you knew someone. It's just been transformative. And I think it's the best resource available for helping people give through their networks. And we're all grateful for that. The other thing I want to say is I don't want anyone in this audience to think for a moment that Reid is one of those ordinary entrepreneurs who's not different from the rest of us. In addition to being the model of a giver for so many people in Silicon Valley, Cheryl said yesterday that she's just always blown away by just how brilliant you are. And I think for anyone who wants to soak up more of Reid's wisdom, there's a wonderful blog post that Ben Kesnoka wrote about the 10,000 hours he spent with Reid. And
I feel like right there if you want to ambush him.
Yeah, but I feel like just an hour with you is enough to write a post of that length. And I'm really grateful that you were willing to share your wisdom with us. Thank you.
Now, I guess we're supposed to line up outside the theater in the reception area for book signing, just for logistics. All right, thanks.